Right, good evening, and thanks for clicking on to the Monday edition of Vogan's European Outlook. It is the 4th of November, and we remain trapped underneath this anticyclonic gloom, as it's been portrayed. And that was actually first mentioned in publications all the way back 100 years ago yesterday. I seen one tweet there showing the term being mentioned. And it was actually the 4th of November. Back in 1924. So, yeah, it is not a new term by any stretch. And it is not really much of a new phenomenon, especially at this time of the year when you get kind of stagnant weather patterns. You've got low sun angle, and when you've got moisture trapped underneath sinking air, and essentially warmer air aloft and cooler air trapped underneath all that thick grey layer, you tend to find it is hard to shift, especially when you've not got any wind to kind of push anything along at the moment. This is the remnants of a subtropical storm Paddy. If you notice here on the NHC site, the remnants dissipated at 3 p.m. this afternoon. But essentially it's stuck just off the west of Iberia at the moment here, still showing up on NHC's graphics. We also have Tropical Depression 18 now on the radar of the NHC, and we expect some development over the next 24 to 48 hours. We'll keep an eye on this going forward also. But obviously there has been more issues with regards to extreme rainfall in Spain. This time it is the Barcelona area that has been affected by severe flooding again. Cut off areas of low pressure trapped underneath block and high pressure, and SSTs in the western Mediterranean of 20-21 Celsius. So you've got ample fuel there, and you've got cold air in the mid and upper levels. You've got all the ingredients coming together, that flow coming in off the Mediterranean, driving those powerful thunderstorms. This was the scene at El Prat Airport in Barcelona earlier today. So very, very nasty situation can be seen here, and this was a scene that was replicated across the city.
Al aeropuerto. Aquí tenemos una piscina.
So yeah, training thunderstorms streaming in off the western Mediterranean, dumping again exceptional amounts of rainfall in a very short space of time. Spain has certainly had a very, very tough time in recent, in the past week or so. First the Valencia area, and now further north up the coast. This was visible imagery here showing the thunderstorms developing. Keep an eye up here. This was the thunderstorms that blew up over the Barcelona area, and you had flow coming in off those warmer than average Mediterranean waters, and that kind of fueled this yet another extreme rainfall event for the region. So remember back, I said that there was a small window of opportunity for something a little bit colder during the second half of this month. I'm still holding on to this, and actually the modelling is starting to kind of sway towards this. Remember I said that it's you could almost count 10 to 14 days after the MJO goes into a particular phase that you may see response within the atmosphere. Now, this is still not a guarantee that it's going to happen, but it's interesting nonetheless that we are now in phase 8 of the Mandrillian Oscillation, which is in the Central Pacific, that convection. And look at the AO and the NAO. It is now starting to trend below the neutral line. So this is the Arctic Oscillation. Notice here that we're starting to trend negative here. And then if we go over to the North Atlantic Oscillation, it too seen by the GFS ensemble. Not majorly deep negative, but nonetheless, that is an interesting trend that has really only developed over the last 48 hours or so. When I show you the GFS ensemble, this is the upcoming 5-day period, looking at the hemisphere as a whole, and again, all about discussing the evolution of pattern and how this may change. This has been something that I've been harping on about really for a good couple of weeks now. The modelling hasn't really been showing much in the way of cold air. We've had this blocking high pressure anchored over Western Europe. That has been and is likely to remain anchored, by the way, all the way up to the middle portions of this month. So there's no real change. Dry and high pressure dominance. This is the upcoming 7 days. You can see the core of the high centered over the Norwegian Sea into southern Scandinavia. We've got a deep negative here over the Atlantic. We've got a strong trough dropping into the western United States. That's boosting the ridge over the eastern United States, boosting the negative over the North Atlantic up and towards the Davis Straits. We've got above average heights across the Arctic, if you notice. But then we've also got another ridge of high pressure over Western Europe with cut-off lows causing all sorts of issues in southwestern Europe, as we already know. But we've got the amplified pattern. The problem is that this high is stationary. It's anchored in place. But look at what happens as we play through this loop. Keep a close eye on the ridge trough sequence here over the northern hemisphere. As we play through this loop, you notice here that we eventually start to see the modelling indicate that we have this westward and northwestward pull of the high away from the UK, away from the west of Europe, back westwards and possibly northwards here. So this is an interesting change now seen by the modelling in the not so distant future. This is now the period between the 15th and the 20th of November. I want to show you also this here of the GFS, I believe it is. Yeah, it is. This is the mean sea level pressure anomaly chart. And this is how things are looking. There's the remnants of a subtropical storm Paddy. It looks as if it's just going to kind of fade away as it moves towards Portugal. So that is a good thing, obviously. We also continue to see this high remaining in place across the majority of Europe. A lack of rainfall away from areas that have seen the flooding, obviously. We've got a significant lack of rainfall over the next 10 to 15 days. Play through this loop, you see areas of low pressure getting deflected north up towards Iceland and Greenland. What I think is happening as well, by the way, we've got very, very mild mid and upper levels of the atmosphere for the time of the year. And what we are doing is, with this negative over the North Atlantic, ridge over Europe, we're sending the flow up from the south towards the Arctic region. This is a transfer of heat towards the Arctic. And what I think this is going to do is this is going to help build pressure up into the Arctic region. This transfer, this setup here is not that atypical for November. Gloomy skies, persistent conditions, stuck for a long period of time. This is the legacy of Phase 5 into Phase 6 of the MJO, I believe anyway. But this negative here and this positive here is essentially allowing that transfer of subtropical heat up into the colder high latitude region. What that should do is it should start to build pressure within the Arctic, and that is also going to in turn affect the stratosphere also. But playing through this loop, look at this here, Saturday the 9th of November, we're transferring a lot of warmth between the two pressure systems northwards up into the Arctic. And then as we play it through, you notice here by the time we reach the early portions of next week, we've got a very deep area of low pressure, if you notice here, to the east of Newfoundland. But we're also seeing an even stronger high building at the surface. This is an incredibly strong surface high developing. But notice what's happening. There's a subtle change as we progress through next week, seen by this one GFS operational run. And that is the high starts to kind of get backed further west. Look at Greenland. We're starting to see the high pressure then building here. This could all be associated with that transfer currently happening of warm air getting lifted north and then builds the pressure pattern. And then look at this here, Sunday the 17th of November. This certainly looks a lot more interesting in terms of cold. If we look at the 850s, see what the modelling is showing, and there you go. This is one model run, and again, there is going to be a lot of back and forth here. This model run may be suggesting cold now and then it backs away. We'll take that certainly on board, and you don't go by one model run, but certainly this is a very interesting little change now starting to show up. Playing through this loop here of the GFS, look at all this warm air getting lifted north over western areas of Europe here. These areas of low pressure act as wheels along with the high over to the east as well. So everything's kind of shown quite an interesting trend and look going forward. If we look at the 850 anomaly here, this is the 850 temperature anomalies. You can see here, if we go back to the current period, we're seeing cold air getting driven south over the western Atlantic basin. Further east, we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing that southerly flow and a lot of warm air getting lifted northwards here. And then I don't think there's any coincidence that we're seeing the build-up of pressure and the shift towards a more negative Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation, as we move towards the second half of this month. Let's have a quick look at the hemispheric view in terms of the stratosphere, because again, what's going on within the troposphere then affects the stratosphere. And it's very interesting, actually, what it's indicating with regards to a significant warming showing up. This is the current situation within 10 millibar level. Play through this loop. In fact, let's have a quick look at something else first. Notice here, this is the 10 millibar temperatures over the North Pole, and the average is this grey line here. And notice here that we've seen a significant drop into unusually cold territory here. So this is the temperatures within the 10 millibar level over the Arctic, colder than average. Notice here, this is 10 millibars. Let's look at the 30 millibars. So this is lower down within the stratosphere. And again, that line is drifting below this grey line, which means that we're seeing colder temperatures at this level compared to the climatological average. This is off the JMA, by the way. Go back to the stratosphere. Again, cold air, fairly robust looking. It looks quite symmetric as well. So fairly organised stratospheric polar vortex at the moment. Remember, we've had a lack of blocking over the Arctic region, so we've not had that resistance from troposphere up into the stratosphere to disrupt the circulation. So this is fully expected that we would see a ramp up in the vortex. But as I suspect this transfer of warmth in the troposphere up from subtropics to the pole, then there is resistance coming back into the stratospheric level here. And if we play through this loop, look at the warming now starting to show up over Eurasia. Yes, we've got a core of minus 84 within the polar vortex. We're pushing it southwards towards North America, Greenland, North Atlantic, even Europe as well. Could we see even some polar stratospheric clouds showing up maybe next week? That's possible. But this is a very interesting weakening of the PV as we play through this loop. If we look at the anomaly chart here, you can see a significant warming taking place. And I think this is in response to what's taking place now. Then it propagates up into the upper levels of the atmosphere. And look at this here. That's quite a significant warming showing up here. I do still expect once this blocking phase happens, we go back more towards a positive Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation. The reason why is I think the Manjulian oscillation is going to rotate back through phases 2, 3, and then into 4 and 5. That would favour the return of lower heights up over the Arctic region. Then we see the response from troposphere up into the stratosphere. The ECMWF model is still indicating that the PV, remember I've been saying here for quite some time, we've got this strong PV at the moment, then it goes interestingly weak, below average. That is now seen by the GFS model, but the ECM still has this going strong once again towards the end of the month and into the early portions of December. So what response does that have on the atmosphere? That will be subject to question. Finally, looking at the GFS temperature anomalies here for Europe, we'll look at rainfall as well. Let's go back to the Europe view and then we'll end with that. Upcoming 5 days, no surprise, we're warmer than average. That's the 850 anomalies here. Let's look at the surface and see what it's showing. So this is the upcoming 5-day period. In terms of rainfall, we have got a distinct lack of rainfall. And even if we play right the way through, you notice here that we have a lack of rainfall all the way out to the 20th of the month. skip back. Let's have a look at the temperature anomalies here. Is it now starting to show a below average towards the end of the run? Let's play and see if it is. It is starting to kind of fade in terms of the warmth anyway. I would expect, I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, if we start to see this going below average across not just Europe but also the UK and Ireland also. So maybe the ideas that have been going on about for a prolonged period of time now will have some merit to it. We may start to see the response. Looking at the rainfall, we have got very little to speak about. We do have some shower activity, interesting enough, over Northern Ireland, if you notice, but we've got a couple of speckles showing up over the western central belt. That may be more in the way of drizzle as opposed to anything else. Let's go back to the overview of the GFS model and see what it's showing with regards to the next several days here, because we don't have a huge amount to speak about, admittedly, but we'll play through the loop anyway and see what takes place. So I would imagine underneath all that thick cloud cover, these are the current temperatures, by the way, 9 to 13 Celsius across the board. So again, very little change in temperature both between day and night, but also up and down the length of the land. We're really only talking 2 or 3 degrees. In fact, it's actually kind of relatively cool, believe it or not, underneath that cloud cover. It's actually slightly warmer aloft as opposed to at the surface because of this type of inversion that we've got going at the moment. But you can see here as we play through the loop, you can see very little in the way of change. We've got a little bit of fronts now edging closer to the UK, but notice the high just remains in place, keeping that front to the west. We don't really have a great deal to speak about between now and the end of this week. We may have something a little bit more unstable as we move towards the end of the working week if the GFS has any sort of merit to it. Continue to play through all the way out to the middle portions of next week here. We've got a near 1040 high. There's that highly anomalous surface high starting to show up. Remember, I showed you the anomaly just a short time ago here, but that's the response here. We're talking essentially a 1040 millibar high centered over Scotland here. If you had clear skies and light winds, certainly we could get some cold air underneath that, but it depends on how much cloud cover you have. But continuing to play through this loop, and then you start to see changes take place. There's that high now moving up towards Greenland, and then we've got the area of low pressure over the Baltic Sea, northerly flow, and they may have something a little bit more wintry to speak about between the 15th and the 20th of this month. So we'll watch and see what happens going forward. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time with more. Bye for now.